Hey, Tyler, I'm really hungry. Do you have anything to eat? Like, I'm kind of snackish, maybe some candy or something like that.
Yeah, I got some mini Oreos here and Jolly Ranchers,
Okay.
um, Starburst,
Yeah?
Werther's, and
Oh, how old are you?
and Skittles.
Oh, I love Skittles. Yeah.
Oh,
Could
man.
I have some? I just want to. Hey,
No,
come on.
no. Hey,
Open up.
hey, hey!
Open up.
Stop
Come
it!
on. Give
No,
me the candy. I want
these,
the
these
candy.
are
Give me the
these are my
candy. Ah,
candies.
ah,
Get your own
ah!
candy.
All I got is a can of tuna. You didn't even hold this up. What is
Serves
this?
you right.
What kind of sorcery is that? Hello, and welcome to Twilight Zone Tuesdays. My name is Nathan.
And I'm Tyler.
And if you did not catch that, you have not seen The Shelter, the episode of The Twilight Zone, Season 3, Episode 3, originally aired September 29th, 1961. So go and watch the episode before you watch this, because it'll be more helpful if you've seen it. But
Yeah.
basically, the premise is that you've got a doctor and his wife and child, and they're in this, bomb shelter, and then all of the members of their, along their block, all of their neighbors demand to get in because they think that the world's going to end, and that they've got to get in there. So anyway, it's a good episode, and we're going to talk about it because this is a series where I've chosen 13 of my favorite Twilight Zone episodes from the original series, and we're watching them and then kind of doing a review and discussion. You're going to start eating the candy.
Sorry.
It's okay. Um, like the can of tuna is the thing that my cat is most excited about. He's like, that's the best. I don't care about the candy. Give me the tuna. Um, but yeah, so we review and discuss 13 episodes from the Twilight Zone. And like I say, this is going to be The Shelter. We do have a sponsor for today's episode. So our sponsor for today is Radiation Proof Wood. So if you're facing the specter of nuclear annihilation and you want to have some way to save you and your family, just head on down to your local lumber, hardware store, wherever they sell lumber, and get radiation proof wood. It'll hold up to really any atomic blast, anything that you can imagine, hold out the
Absolutely.
radiation.
Yeah, perfect for the door to your shelter or just the walls to your shelter. It's just perfect. A nice cheap alternative, relatively cheap.
Yeah, sure. And yeah, it's so much better than anything that would be like lead lined or some kind of bunker. It'll
Yeah,
hold up to any blast, doesn't matter, like hydrogen bomb.
right. Yeah, the explosion from it, it'll keep it out, no problem.
Yeah,
However, if you do have neighbors with battering rams, don't let them get anywhere near this wood because they will probably be able to break through it.
pretty easily too. Yeah,
Yeah,
it'll hold
yeah,
up to a nuclear bomb, but not to neighbors with a battering ram. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah, just
Just be aware of that.
yeah, be careful. Be careful. Build wisely. All right, folks. I hope you enjoy.
There is a fifth discussion beyond that which is known to man. It is a discussion as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between anger and joy, between silence and outrage, and it lies between the pit of Nathan's fears and the summit of Tyler's knowledge. This is a discussion of intellectual properties. It is a podcast which we call Ignore the Bell.
All right, so we're talking about Season 3, Episode 3 of the original Twilight Zone series, The Shelter. So I do want to point out before we get into the podcast that if you folks have not picked up on it, because you did not pick up on this, one of the neighbors is played by Jack Albertson, who plays Grandpa Joe in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, only 10 years after this episode, but the dude aged like 20 years in between somehow.
Yeah, no, I know. I recognized the voice, but I didn't know from where. And yeah, once you said that he was Grandpa Joe, then I was like, oh yeah, that makes so much sense. But he looks so different.
He really does, yeah, because this was filmed in 1961, and then Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory came out in 71. So
Yeah.
only like probably less than 10 years from the filming of it. And I don't think they did anything as far as special effects or makeup or anything. I think it's just like he aged.
Right. Yeah. He did grow out a mustache, and His
maybe
hair was
that's
a little bit more wild. I don't know.
yeah, maybe. But yeah, so anyway, this episode is I want to say this at the beginning. It's similar in terms because we had a good conversation about the monsters are due on Maple Street, and it's very similar in terms of themes of that, but kind of what we talked about with the monsters are due on Maple Street. Like, how would that episode play out if you didn't have the intervention of like the aliens at the end of the episode who have been messing around with this street? And
Yeah.
I'm very, very sure that this is the exact same street that they used for the monsters are due on Maple Street, that they just used the same set.
Right. Yeah.
So
yeah, no, it's a really fun episode. Well, maybe not fun, but it's a really good episode. Um, it's interesting how we start with this whole, birthday party for the doctor and everything
yeah,
he's saying, how much they owe him for everything that he's done. And then instantly, then it gets into this panic of the entire group there due to supposedly an incoming nuclear bomb.
strike.
I believe it's
Yeah.
yeah,
That there's, I believe they think there's like missiles that are heading their direction, right? And they say that they're only 40 miles from New York City. And
yeah.
And the other thing too that I should mention is that this episode was written by Rod Serling. It's an original screenplay, so he does a good job of establishing at the very beginning of this. They really care for him. He's the town doctor. They express all of these nice sentiments, and then very quickly just turn on him. So there's a couple things that I want to say with this. So I guess I'll start with this one. Like so many Twilight Zone episodes, The Simpsons have done a parody of this, and I'm assuming that you caught the parody.
When they are in the Simpsons episode, then they're hiding from like the meteor that's coming down.
Yes, it's Bart's Comet, that episode.
Yes,
And so I first saw that before I saw the Twilight Zone. And this is like one of those things that, like, for parents or whoever else, but some people will criticize kids, watching something like The Simpsons or reading a book that's like, it's too simplistic, and it's like, no, they should be reading good literature and they should be watching, like more sophisticated stuff. And it's like, no, but they could also be entryways into these, like, sort of like a gateway book, a gateway TV show into other stuff that does get a little bit more sophisticated. So I was so surprised when I first watched the Twilight Zone episode, because I'm like, oh, what's going to happen is everybody will crowd in there, and then the doctor and his family, they'll go out, and then the shelter will collapse, they'll all die, and then the doctor and his family will be fine, right? Kind of like the Simpsons episode of you're safer outside. That was the worst place to be, is in the shelter. And everybody will start singing Que Sera Sera by the end of this. And it doesn't end that way at all. But so there's that. And then and on the one hand, I do think that this episode is it's exploring Cold War anxieties and hysteria, very similar to the monsters are due on Maple Street, because you do get the accusation, how quickly they turn on each other, like, oh, there's, not like you semi-American, as they say to the guy. I think he's supposed to be Italian, right? And that's, at least, like, I'm making a presumption there, but that they're saying you're not fully American, and so we can't trust you. And the way they turn on each other, and of course the specter of nuclear warfare and all of that. So it's really dealing with Cold War tensions, which I want to talk about. But the other thing that's super interesting about this episode, and I think this is maybe the most interesting thing, is that this is just Aesop's fable, The Ant and the Grasshopper.
Right. Yeah.
Like, Serling just
so
did.
True.
I know. And I don't think that I caught that. I've shown this episode before, and I don't know that I necessarily made that connection until this time. It's been a while since I've since I've watched this episode. So maybe I had thought of it before, but I forgot. But
Yeah.
watching it this time, I was just so struck by that because the doctor makes these accusations, hey, you guys all laughed at me. I was busy spending my money, spending my free time building this bomb shelter to protect me and my family. You guys could have been doing the same thing, but you guys played all summer. You had your barbecues and your block parties and all of that. And, you all thought that I was crazy, but, like now you want what I have as a result of all of my hard work, which Aesop wrote this like 2,600 years before this episode came out. And it's
Right.
shocking that it is that story exactly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, that is a really great comment there. It's I think it's interesting though because in this context, then it it's essentially saying everybody should build a bomb shelter, which is just a horrifying thought.
That's the responsible thing to do. Be a grown-up, build a bomb shelter today.
Yeah, that's the lesson I learned from this.
Right,
You don't want to be down the road and thinking like, oh man, they were so smart for, building this bomb shelter for themselves, and why didn't I do that?
Right, exactly. Yeah, no, that is really the logic of where this episode goes. And it's strange because I mean, there's a couple things that are puzzling about this because it does make the neighbors seem monstrous. They're irresponsible, they're reckless, they haven't built their bomb shelter. And on the one hand, it's sort of functioning as an allegory where it's plan for the future. Don't just spend all of your money today.
Right.
Put savings away for any circumstances in the future in which you maybe can't earn money, right? Like maybe there's going to be an illness in the family, or you get injured or something like that. So you want to plan for the future to take care of you and your family. And if you don't come banging on your neighbor's door, your neighbor who is responsible, and then saying, hey, you owe me. You were responsible. You sacrificed. You made all of these sacrifices for years and years and years. And now I want what you have. And so in some ways, functioning as an allegory, it's a critique of consumerist culture that you get in the 1950s, getting into the 1960s. But it's also, in a strange way, from like a political perspective, it's almost taking more of a libertarian perspective, where it's don't rely on the government to take care of you. And but then, and it's a critique of liberalism of, no, we want to share resources, and then saying but the critique is they can't be shared in that way. You've got to take care of yourself. Don't look to the government, don't look to your neighbors to take care of you, but you've got to do whatever it takes to take care of you and your family. Right. That, because you have people who will say, like, even like in the contemporary discourse of politics, you have a lot of people saying that there should be no billionaires, that what we should do is anybody who's earned billions of dollars, that just needs to be dispersed to all these people. And then it's like, well, we want to have that. And it's like, well, why do you want to have that? Because they have it and we want it. But what else is there beyond that? Because they say that, like, you've exploited workers in order to become a billionaire is the argument, the liberal argument, or the left wing argument would be that you don't earn $1 billion without exploiting workers in some way and exploiting consumers. But then saying, you shouldn't have all of that stuff. We want that stuff, and we will become a mob in order to take it. Because this is kind of the tyranny of the masses, which is what the founding fathers were concerned with. Is they were very skeptical in regards to democracy. Because if you've got a small group of people who have a fair bit of wealth and a majority of people who don't have that much wealth, but then it's a pure democracy, then what will happen is the majority will then just vote to say, distribute the wealth so that way we get their stuff, their land, and even though we haven't necessarily earned it. So it's functioning on all these different levels. That's really interesting.
Yeah. So I guess the thing that really stood out to me was Rod Serling's narration,
Yeah.
where he does say like this is something that that need not ever happen,
Yes.
but it could happen anywhere. And so again, thinking back to the fact that it's a bomb sheltering, whatever, then it's like, well, he could be talking about nuclear war need never happen, or it could be, turning on each other need never happen. But it seems to just be like, we don't need to all fight over this one resource if everybody just, creates their own bomb shelter, which
Right.
again just seems so odd.
And that's the thing, and that's where if you're looking at it from the literal level, which there were literal concerns over nuclear warfare, like there were concerns
Mhm.
over literal warfare, like literal nuclear warfare at the
Yeah.
time, and certainly not long after this. Then you get the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? I think it was
Right.
after this that
I
it was
believe it
shortly
was
after this.
1964. Yeah.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't that late. I think 62. I want to say
Oh, okay.
because Kennedy was already he died in 63, so it was obviously
Okay.
before then.
Right. Yeah.
But he was elected in 60. So and this came out in 1961. So I can't remember exactly when. Are you looking it up?
Yeah. Yeah, 1962 for Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah. Okay, so like just a year later, then you do have the Cuban Missile Crisis, a year after this episode aired, and that specter of incoming nuclear missiles was very real for a lot of people. So there was the fear about literal nuclear warfare, but as Aesop's fable, then as this functioning more as allegory, then it's
Right.
interesting because like if you listen to the opening narration, Rod Serling says, "What you're about to watch is a nightmare. It is not meant to be prophetic. It need not happen. It's the fervent and urgent prayer of all good men, of all men of goodwill that it shall never happen." But in this place, in this moment, it does happen. This is the Twilight Zone. And so think about this. Like, let's say I am your financial planner. Okay, Tyler, I'm your financial planner. You sit down in the bank, you're looking across the desk for me, and then I'm saying, like, let me tell you a story. You get injured in the workplace. You don't have any savings. You don't have a retirement savings plan. You're just relying on the Canada pension plan, and it's not going to be enough to take care of you and your family. And so this is not meant to be prophetic. It does not need to happen. It is just the fervent and urgent prayer of a man here of goodwill that it shall never happen to you, which is why you need to start investing for your future. What I suggest is you take 20% of your weekly income and you start putting it into whatever, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whatever. It's this idea of don't just expect that when things get bad later on in life, somebody's going to be there to bail you out, which
Right.
it's such an interesting episode because I don't know, like, I don't even know with Serling, and I haven't done enough research if he intentionally is reworking the themes of the ant and the grasshopper from Aesop, or whether
Mhm.
it's just, a coincidence, which I don't think it's a coincidence. I think if anything, it's subconscious or unconscious,
Right.
depending on how you interpret it. Uh,
Yeah.
that it showed up in there. And while the episode seems to be about like Cold War anxieties, and on the one hand it seems to be much more of a conservative and a libertarian argument of you can't just rely on other people to take care of you, and it shouldn't surprise you when you get to the point where you do have to look at, did I make good decisions over the past however many years to take care of
Mhm.
my family? It's like it's essentially demanding that you be responsible, and if you're not responsible, then you expecting other people to take care of you, that makes you a monster.
Right. So the interesting thing, of course, is that the episode I think does a good job of showing the doctor's point of view as well, of or not his point of view, but him as the antagonist, where he is, even though he has done all these things, he's not allowing all these neighbors in. And of course, he's very reasonable in doing so. In like, there's not enough to go around for everybody. Could they fit one more person? Maybe. But he's very much like, we have enough for this much, like just for the three of us.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to, again, like with Aesop's fable as well, then it's the idea that, the not as hard worker, in this case, the full mob of people, then they ruin the bomb shelter. They end up
Yes.
all teaming up.
They spoil it
And
for everyone.
right. Yeah. And so it's interesting that even though he had planned everything out, and the doctor planned everything out, and he was like, yeah, this is my stuff, and nobody else is going to get it, then it ends up being ruined by him being the only one who had it. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just really interesting.
It is interesting, and he is in some ways the antagonist. But I'm saying if you take this, because, and I'm not saying, and I think this is where people struggle with, because I've taught long enough that I've seen people struggle with this, where if they don't agree with the political message that seems to be in a text, then they just explain why they don't agree with the political message, but they don't explain how else you can interpret it. So I'm not saying
Right.
that you should interpret it this way, but if you follow through what seems to me to be the only political message you can take from this, it's, let's say if you do say to somebody like Bill Gates, you're a billionaire, you shouldn't be a billionaire, or Bezos with Amazon, you're a billionaire, you shouldn't be a billionaire. We are going to take all of your money, these billions of dollars that you have. And then it's like, okay, then no one gets to have Amazon anymore. It will just
Mhm.
cease to exist. So then it's like, well, do you benefit from Amazon? Do you appreciate being able to purchase products for a very low price and have them be delivered directly to your door, and that you get lots and lots of variety from being able to shop online like this? Do you appreciate having that? And if the answer is yes, but he shouldn't be a billionaire, then it's like, you can't have it both ways. You
Mm.
can't, that the mob ultimately, if they have their way, they will destroy this good thing. Uh,
Right.
but like all metaphors, and certainly all allegories, it falls apart when you look at it too closely, because
Mhm.
the neighborhood is not benefiting from the fallout shelter, not really,
Right.
unless you say that the see, and this is where there seems to be some conflation, at least on the doctor's part, between a bomb shelter and a fallout shelter. Because if it's just a
Mhm.
bomb shelter, it's like, this is just meant to survive the initial blast. Then it's like,
Right.
well, the community should save the doctor from the initial blast, because then he can go out and he can tend to wounded people. Who else do you
Right.
want to be most safe in some kind of explosion? You want the town doctor to be safe, so then he can take care of casualties. Because if somebody else survives and they're perfectly fine, and then they come out of the shelter and the doctor's wounded and this person has no medical training, that person's not going to be very helpful. um,
Right.
but then he talks about it like it's a fallout shelter, like they'll just be living
Mhm.
under there for, like,
I
during
think
the
he's
entire fallout period.
Yeah, I think he said like 2 weeks or something like that, which of course is not long enough, but
No, to
um,
survive nuclear fallout, no. And it doesn't seem like a big enough shelter to do that
right.
either. And then isn't I'm because we've watched a bunch of these, isn't that, don't we get the line from his wife in this of, who wants to live in that world if everybody's like gone?
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. She does say that it's essentially like, do we even want to go on
Yeah,
if there will be nobody else left?
right.
Um, which is, a theme that comes back in many different episodes.
Yeah,
Um, And yeah, I mean that certainly is a powerful thing. And then it's because of the son that they're like, this is why we have to go on,
right.
because he's only I think 12 years old, and yeah, we need to make sure that he survives. So it's yeah,
I guess
yeah, no,
if you follow through what I'm saying then with the political message of this, then I guess if you say, if you follow the allegory, if you say, so if Amazon looks at this and then says, okay, but if everybody is poor and broke and busted, they're all like wounded, would we still want to have Amazon? Do you know what I mean? That it's like there is a sense of you want everyone in your community to be well, but at the same time, you can't force them to make responsible decisions.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, and that is the interesting thing, is that it is, very much saying like, you can't make sure that everybody takes care of themselves, and all you can do is, make sure that you are safe.
Right.
In this case, taken care of. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
And so I want to know, I want to ask you about this. So you get to the end of it, and I'm thinking especially with the monsters are due on Maple Street, comparing that to this one, that the monsters are due on Maple Street, they're kind of left with this realization that, I mean, I guess they're not, because it ends just with this mob scene where it's just complete chaos on their street. But if the episode ended before that, where they all just now have to live with the fact that they were all kind of complicit in murdering one of their neighbors, like that seems pretty awful. But this one, you get to the end of it, and they now still have to be neighbors, and the doctor's like, no, like we can't come back from this, like, oh, you didn't just go a little bit crazy. That how can you still be neighbors to each other after the way what they do?
So it's interesting because they don't seem to have learned their lesson. They're like, let's have another barbecue and everything,
right,
and have more parties.
Right.
And it's just like, no. You called one of them, like semi-American, and like just horrible things to each other. Oh, so you're saying your family is better than mine? All of this like infighting. There's just like, how can you look at each other the same way? Like, sure, you might be able to play nice, but it won't be the same.
And this is where it seems like it really is just a version of Aesop's fable of the ant and the grasshopper, because the ant says to the grasshopper, like with impending winter, why don't you just dance to deal with it, right? That's what you did all summer, right? And it's like, that's basically, they haven't learned their lesson by the end of it. And they haven't realized, not only was it wrong of us to turn on our one neighbor who is most responsible, and that all trust, all sense of civilization like disappeared in an instant, right? Mm-hmm. That not only are they not really acknowledging that, they're not turning from their old ways either. It just continues to be, let's just amuse ourselves to death, which, kind of shows up as well in, what's the Time Enough at Last, right? That, the problem, like, it's that social critique of everybody just wants to like have barbecues and play cards and watch television, and they're not thinking about important things. And this is like, think about important things, be a grown-up. And people still make that critique, that social critique of, whether it's like, it's amusing ourselves to death with, streaming options everywhere, television, gigantic TVs, video games, all of that stuff, and like, food delivery, that, you know what I mean? Like, everything gets delivered now.
Podcast listening.
That's right. All of this stuff. And to be able to then say like, oh, people aren't, it's a juvenile way of living where you're not, being disciplined and responsible and making good decisions. It's just like, amuse me. And that seems to be that same criticism in this episode. And they don't learn their lesson at the end of it, which when Rod Serling at the end says like, or I guess at the beginning, then he says, it doesn't have to happen. This isn't meant to be prophetic. But I don't know how else you watch this episode, and like, how do you watch this episode and say, I should have a barbecue with the neighbors? Like, because you're kind of right that it's like, you just get to the end of this and it's like, so I should build a bomb shelter?
Yeah. That was honestly my reaction. I'm just like, okay, this like totally fits in the Cold War era, but nowadays, like, what do I do with this?
Like I say, I think what you do with it is you say, So I should be talking to some kind of financial planner about
Right.
retirement options.
Yeah.
I think that's what the episode is saying. And I think it's very much saying, don't then resent other people who did sacrifice and made good decisions throughout their life. And like, because the one thing that this doesn't, as an allegory, what that doesn't take into account is people who have legitimately had, extenuating circumstances in their life, whether it's a health condition or, whatever else, that they just have been unable to plan for the future in that way. Not plan, but unable to be able to save for the future in that way. That's what it just, that kind of criticism of people who don't have savings. That's the thing that ignores, right? Is it's presuming, like, this guy's like a doctor. It's like, well, are you really going to take credit for the fact that you were born with a brain that's capable of doing that? Because not everybody has got the mind. Just genetically, you can work and work and work, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have an aptitude for hard sciences to be able to be successful enough to become a doctor. It's, you know what I mean? It's the blank slate approach to humanity, that we're all born as blank slates and you can do whatever you want. And it's like, well, probably not.
Yeah.
So
yeah. But yeah, so that was about all that I had for this episode.
Yeah, me too. I really like this one. I think it's such an interesting one, and I'm curious. So if anybody can kind of point this out, if anybody's done more research on this than I have, if you can say, because I've only done a teeny tiny amount of research on this, and I don't know that Serling was playing around with the ant and the grasshopper with Aesop's fable, but that to me is exactly what this episode is. It really is, but just set in the Cold War. And if he was intentionally playing with that, that's interesting. But I think it'd be even more interesting if he just like inadvertently did it.
Right. Yeah.
But it does kind of show the strength of these parables that you get, these fables.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. When people look at this, because like there's a lot of people who will, not even realize how much wisdom you can find in ancient texts. From the classics of, but it's like, because you could look at this and say like, wow, that's a great message. And it's like, yeah, like we've known about this lesson for like 2,600 years and people still haven't learned it.
Yeah.
But I guess, anyway, I think I'm done. I think I've said everything I wanted to say with this episode. So feel free to comment below, folks, on any of the stuff that we talked about and any thoughts that you have on this episode. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Imagine, if you will, subscribing and hitting the notification bell. Leave your comments below and maybe, just maybe, you'll receive a response. All for a channel referred to by many as Ignore the Bell.